Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farrar, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show on January 21, 2025. It is day 1063 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. 1063 days marked with terror, war crimes, and ongoing war atrocities on the battlefield itself. Chuck, news again coming out today of Russian soldiers killing, in the most gruesome way possible, wounded Ukrainian soldiers who had surrendered.
Yeah, we have seen a total abandonment by Russia from day one of any of the rules of warfare. So this includes the murder of disarmed, wounded combatants. And again, we speak of war crimes. They are prosecutable as war crimes, but let's call it what it is. That's murder, right? Guy throws down his gun and puts his hands up. You have a duty of care, almost as though you were a medical person. And in fact, the rules of warfare require that you provide medical assistance. They require that you give them shelter, clothing, food. You don't get to kill them. But, in a larger scale, what could we possibly expect from these guys? They targeted a McDonald's the other day, right? The city of Mariupol is surrounded by tens of thousands of unmarked graves of civilians. How did they all die? So this is Ruski Mir. This is what they are. And we had someone on, Alan, I remember one night, a general who is much smarter than you and I, and he said that the quality of the soldiers produced by a nation are a reflection of their national character. And that's what we're getting here.
Well, I do hope that the incoming Trump administration takes some notice of this. We were hoping for some clarity by listening to President Trump's inaugural address on January 20th. He didn't really speak about Ukraine. Marco Rubio has now been sworn in as Secretary of State, and he has indicated that ending the war in Ukraine will be a top priority of this administration. President Zelensky, who is at the Davos Economic Forum today, said that he understands it is Trump's desire and intention to end the war in 2025. But of course, Zelensky spoke about justice, a fair way to end the war, an equitable way to end the war. One continues to hope that Trump's advisors about Ukraine will take more notice of the atrocities, will understand what is at stake, and quite possibly give Ukraine everything it needs for victory.
Right. And, we hear the president and the incoming Secretary of State, and, it looks like they want to solve it in 2025. I'm just going to go out on a limb here, Alan. This isn't a problem that can be solved in a year. It can't. And there are various contingency trees that'll be triggered, not just on whether or when the war in Ukraine ends, but much more importantly, rather, how it ends. Do the forces return to the status quo antebellum where they were 1,200 days ago? That would be actually, I demand that, but that in itself is not sufficient, right? We want them out of Crimea. Nobody invited them there. We want them out of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson. We want them out of there. No one invited them there. They came, bayonets flashing, right? So I don't get real tripped up in deadlines set by politicians. Don't don't fall for that. I'm going to continue with being politically agnostic on this show. It's just the way we do. I will always refer to the commander in chief, and those are, I will comment on options I see available to the commander in chief and stay as apolitical as possible. But something you told me just before we came on the show, that it looks as though everyone in the Pentagon on the Ukraine brief is now looking for something else to do. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
I mean, not only has something like that never happened in my career, it never happened in my father's career. And, I'm a third generation naval officer. I don't think I've ever heard of anything like that happening. Well, and that's really throwing out the baby and the bathwater right there.
Yeah, it really is. It appears to be the case that everyone on the Ukraine desk in the Pentagon has been fired. They all have to be replaced, or some of them have to be replaced. There is no confirmed new Secretary of Defense. The Trump administration is still without the majority of the cabinet members it needs to conduct policy and to run the government. And it will take a few more weeks for these posts to be filled, and they won't necessarily all be filled by the current nominees.
Yeah, I don't think 90 days is too long a period to expect appointments to come through, confirmations to happen, new leadership to take root, right? If I were a 3-star admiral or general right now, I'd be hiding under my bed because I don't want to get handed the Ukraine football and told to build my staff from scratch. As a junior officer, look, it takes you 6 months just to learn the maps. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting you say 90 days, Chuck. Trump suspended all foreign aid delivered through USAID. So that's through the State Department, all humanitarian aid except to 3 countries, Egypt, Israel, and Jordan. So the humanitarian aid that the United States has been providing Ukraine is indeed part of this suspension. It does not affect the military aid that has been promised and we hope will now be delivered to Ukraine. So that's important. But, it is the middle of winter in Ukraine. The humanitarian aid that the United States has delivered has made a difference to 1 million Ukrainians in need of food and shelter and clothes and warmth. This is basic humanitarian aid.
Yeah, I don't see the point in suspending that. There are internally displaced people in Ukraine who are, as you just said, homeless, hungry, without shelter in the winter, and many of them are within shooting distance of Russian arms. Yeah. In fact, the entire nation is under the gun.
Yeah. Up in Sumy, of course, and Sumy is right across the border from Kursk Oblast. Sumy is shelled every single day by the Russians. Kharkiv shelled every day. Kherson shelled every day, and even worse in Kherson, this drone safari that Russian drone pilots aim at civilians. Bombing buses, bombing cars, bombing grocery stores, literally running down individual Ukrainians walking home.
Fire engines, ambulances.
Yeah.
So I think a good way to as we're in this time of uncertainty, And honestly, look, I think the cherry blossoms are going to come in Washington before the new policy evolves, before this new regime is ready to execute on it. Cherry blossoms about the only time I ever really like to be in Washington. And whenever the cherry blossoms were beautiful and I was in Washington, I was working 24 hours a day in a windowless cube 40 stories below the ground.
That is about the best time to be in Washington, D.C. You don't want to be there in August. You still, to this day, have a real sense that the U.S. Capitol is a malarial swamp.
It is a pestilential place you get the fan tods for being in there.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to take a look at so what are the facts right now? We've got all this uncertainty. What is the United States going to do? How are they going to do it? Who's going to lead it? We can't answer that.
No.
Right. So, but what we can do, and what might be a good place to steer the show today, is let's talk about what many people's perceptions are, but what really the facts on the ground are in Ukraine. I have a very good friend of the show, friend to Alan and I, Dr. Rajan Menon. And Rajan, I sent you a text today. I should have told you we'll be talking about you, but we exchanged text messages today, and Rajan sent me an article and said, wow, things don't look good in Ukraine right now. And look, Dr. Menon teaches security studies, or has at Columbia. He's devoted his lifetime to the study of geopolitics, conflict, gray zone operations, extremely well-informed guy. The article was basically saying, look, the Russians are, I don't have their exact words, but let's just put resurgent. The Russians are attacking vigorously in many places. Okay, put this just in context. The Russians fought all year. They didn't take a day off. They attacked everywhere along the zero line. And Alan and I worked this out. There has been a point of contact at least every 3 kilometers for the entire zero line, and often closer, but they're never farther than 3 kilometers, a mile and a half apart. The Russians have lost more than 420,000 casualties just in 2024. They lost 5,000 tanks. They're getting up to losing 10,000 tanks. They've lost, just in 2024, the combined total of the armies of Great Britain, Germany, and Italy. Lost all their equipment, all of their men, all of their vehicles, everything. And I'm not just talking about the armies of those nations, their entire armed forces, completely squandered and obliterated, upside down and burning in a field. What did they get for that? They captured LA County.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay, so that's where we're going to springboard off today, folks. If you think that's winning and Ukraine's in trouble, Alan has a turtleneck he wants to sell you, which he's looking pretty good in today, too, folks. If you see that, I should have worn mine, Alan.
Yeah, well, we'll it's cold enough.
Coordinate.
It's cold enough, let me tell you. Well, there are another 1,600 Russian casualties today. And at the current rate of Russian losses, our friend Ragnar Gudmundsson from Iceland is predicting, if on average 1,500 casualties a day, and that is the current 7-day average, as a matter of fact. By Victory Day in Moscow, that would be May 9, 2025. That's when they celebrate their victory in the Second World War. Everyone else celebrates on May 8.
Their
by that time,
victory.
990,000, so almost 1 million Russian casualties if the current rate of Russian killed in action, wounded, captured continues. And I see no reason why it won't continue. President Zelensky was in Davos today at the Davos Economic Forum, and he reported that there are about 600,000 Russian troops on Ukrainian soil today, and that 880,000 Ukrainians are under arms. But don't make the mistake of thinking, so Ukraine outnumbers Russia now? No, they don't. In most places on the zero line, Russian forces outnumber the opposing Ukrainian forces because remember, Ukraine actually keeps forces, although, not in significant numbers, but they keep forces along the border with Belarus. They have to. And really, Ukraine is defending a much longer border and front than Russia is attacking. That allows Russia to concentrate their troops.
Yeah, there isn't anymore. I'll go this far. There isn't even a 1-to-1 equivalency with the combat capability of your Make 1 Mod 0 Vatnik and your brave Ukrainian defender of the motherland. Okay, I'm in the tank for Ukraine. Everybody sort of knows that. But I want to tell you that there is a qualitative difference between someone you abduct from the Moscow metro, put on a bus, you train him for a week, ship him for a week, and drop him into the zero line. That guy does not equal an operator from the Omega unit of the Ukrainian National Guard.
No.
No combination there. They're not the same.
No.
The leadership of their officers, there is no equivalency. A battlefield major, battlefield captain in the Ukrainian Armed Forces, company grade officers, battalion grade officers, there is no equivalency with their Russian opposite numbers. You've got a buffoon who is in on the military grift. That's what he does. There is no training. There is no thought given to their military operations. And I'll go one step further. In terms of winning the war, there is no purpose to the things that the Russians do. They're going to devote maybe 10 or 15, perhaps 20,000 troops to take Velika Novosilka, a place they have been trying to take for 3 years. They may eventually take it, and that'll be the first map I put out tomorrow. The place is getting surrounded. I'll say that. But when that red noose finally closes over it, I want everyone to remember, when you look at that map, show me the roads that go out of Velika Novosilka. And you will be astounded, as I truly was, that there are no fucking roads going out of that town. It is not the kind of place Omar Bradley or General Sherman would have put 20,000 guys into. And God knows most of those 20,000 are going to get killed there because that's the way the Russians roll.
Yeah, well, it also speaks to what you mentioned the other day, Chuck, this kind of target lock that affects Russian command. They get their sights set on Bakhmut or Chasiv-Yar, or for that matter, on Vovchansk, or on Velika Novosilka, and now, of course, on Pokrovsk. And they won't give up on a target, or won't revise their plans in order to meet the reality of what's happening on the zero line.
No, it is almost this much of a caricature that there's a big fat general smoking a cigar 50 miles in the rear, and he puts his finger on a map and he says to the lieutenant colonel, I want this place, Chasiv-Yar. Those are your orders. I want this place. I don't want to hear anything else except you've taken it. And that's how you get 1,500 casualties a day.
Mm-hmm.
Chasiv-Yar is not going to fall in the next 5 months. And it is another place now that is utterly symbolic for both sides. But Chasiv-Yar, again, we said before, Bakhmut is the gateway to Chasiv-Yar. And should Chasiv-Yar fall, and it's not going to happen imminently, again, I will ask our gentle readers, take a look at the map and show me the road that goes out of Chasiv Yar. There actually is one. It's a 2-lane CO series highway that you can't even pass. Two tractors can't pass on it. 70, 80,000 dead minimum in Bakhmut/Chasiv Yar.
Yeah. And again, this is where averages don't really do you any good to say that the Russians lose 100 to 200 soldiers to take a single square kilometer of land. That might be true on average across the entire zero line, but there are places on the zero line where Russia loses thousands or even tens of thousands of people to take a square kilometer of land. I think, as a matter of fact, that is exactly what we're seeing happening in Crimea right now. And so we should go to the Crimea map, I think, Chuck. And yes, Russia advanced across the Zarabets reservoir into Ivanivka, but maybe they were invited there by the Ukrainian defenders.
Well, it's practically that is practically the case. And if you have a map, great. That it's the 1430 UTC 21 Jan map. If you don't, there is a sort of north-south zero line, and part of it is the Zarabets River. It is backed up in a couple of places. There are a series of dikes, dams, causeways forming a reservoir there at great expense and great persistence and very little tactic involved. The Russians are across the reservoir in the vicinity of a little town called Ivanivka. The Ukrainians have been really good about trading dirt for time, right? And this is a case where they actually allowed the Russians across the Zarabets River. The Russians go ahead to hold it, and frankly, they are holding a piece of flat ground overlooked by a series of bluffs, and they're getting crushed there every day. And that's not what winning looks like.
So this little salient up in Ivanivka, I was just looking for my little measuring tool, but it looks about like a kilometer that the Russians have advanced here, probably at a very, very high cost.
Yeah, and so if you are looking at the map and you go in real close on Ivanivka, you can see the next town up is Nevsky, and look down and you'll see a water course that connects Nevsky with the Zarabets Reservoir. So everything that Russia is going to fight for around Ivanivka has got to come through that little, I guess that's probably 400 meters or so. It has to cross that rivulet and get into Ivanivka. 400 yards is just about the maximum effective range of an A pattern rifle, right? AR pattern rifles, you get about 600 yards, and an AR-10 or an M14, which our friend Malcolm Nance has equipped many Ukrainian with, fires a big old 308, and the range of that is like 800 yards. So here you've got the Ukrainians have invited the Russians, again, pushing forward. Think of that general in that dugout. I want to hear you're attacking and you're gaining ground. So this clown decides to gain Ivanivka, and Alan, he's really going to wish he didn't.
Yeah.
Right. He's going to wish he didn't get there, and he's really going to wish right now he's not holding on to it because he's going to get clocked.
Well, I think it's also permitted Ukrainian special forces units to operate behind enemy lines in this part of Crimea. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. So, and again, the zero line, it's roughly represented by the red blobs on the maps that Alan and I present. In fact, the zero line is where you get seen and shot at. So you can imagine, if you're standing up in an orange vest, you're going to get shot at a lot quicker than if you have a ghillie suit on. And I'm not exaggerating, folks. You've been moving forward on your fingertips for 2 days. Okay. You can, in combat, if you know what you're doing, you can get right next to somebody. And the soldiers that are stepping off buses and being thrown into Ivanivka, they have as much battlefield experience as the average listener to our program. Not talking about our veterans, but just
me,
average civilian. And I wouldn't say even you, Alan, because you're a woodsman and a canoeist and you can navigate and you know a lot about being in the outdoors.
Yeah.
But these people don't know anything, and that's why, it's the other. I like to think of this. Imagine if Trump were in charge of this war and taking Ukraine. Would the American people stand for losing 1,500 people a day? No, they wouldn't. And Russia is on par for losing as many people as the United States lost in 4 years of, wait for it, World War II. That's where Russian casualties are right now. And Alan brought up a great point last show. It's actually Russia that is at its weakest point militarily since World War II. Not Ukraine, Russia.
Well, that's what I think. That was the point you made, Chuck. The point I made was that Ukraine was at its strongest. But I agree with you, and I think that again is an invitation to the incoming administration to take advantage of Russia's weakness on behalf of Ukraine, and certainly not to push Ukraine into negotiations that could end badly. I mean, Putin is not giving up on his demands. He wants to reduce Ukraine's armed forces to 50,000 troops. He wants Ukraine to be forever neutral and never a member of NATO, never a member of the European Union. As you say, Chuck, he wants Ukraine to become a vassal state, exactly as he intends to make Belarus into a vassal state.
Well, he went to rent a buffoon and got himself a poodle to rule over Belarus. But Mr. Lukashenko, I promise you, your days are limited. I mean, I don't know when they're going to pull you out from under your bed, but they will. You are hated. You don't dare intervene in the Ukrainian war because your entire armed forces is likely to turn against you. And in terms of what Mr. Putin wants, well, let's shrug that off for a moment. But let's go back to what does ending this war look like, right? So we all realize that this war is no longer just about Ukraine, right? This war is about Eastern Europe. This war is about the security of the Baltic states. It is about the security of our two newest NATO members, Sweden and Finland. So what are the conditions under which this conflict can be terminated that are, we've got this guy in the White House. What's in it for me? What's in it for me in the United States? How do I want this war to end? I need European security, right? Because otherwise, and I'll put it right out there. You want to play Mr. Patriotic Cowboy? You either get this thing won in Ukraine, or there's going to be American Marines coming ashore in the Baltics. What do you want? Right? Okay. Well, what's the good outcome here? The good outcome has to be that Russia's military is so thoroughly defeated that it can't pull this crap anymore. That they have lost so many people and so much equipment that militarily they're not capable of pulling this out anymore. Okay, that's not a wild dream of mine. Their military capability has been diminished to the extent already that they can't win this war, right? They are not Their spring offensive is not rolling into Kyiv. It ain't happening. It just isn't.
I even
And
wonder if there
one thing
will
that
be a spring Russian offensive, Chuck. I don't think that Ukraine is sufficiently armed to launch an offensive in the spring or even in the summer. I think that Ukraine probably faces another year decidedly on defense. But I also suspect a year that will continue to be successful for them. Both Ukraine and Russia are racing clocks, different clocks. Putin racing the clock against the collapse of his economy and his ability to continue the war. Ukraine racing against the clock of developing its domestic defense industry so much that it can practically arm itself. Zelensky's already said 30% of everything Ukraine will need to keep fighting in 2025 will be made in Ukraine.
Yeah. And if I were to our Russian listening guests, you better write that down, right? You are accelerating the technological development of Ukrainian arms.
Yeah.
And they have already developed things that didn't exist, classes of weapons that didn't exist. So there's another benefit in this, and you've got to make good out of something. I think you're right. I don't think Ukraine will be equipped to the extent in this coming 2025 that they are going to be able to carry out large-scale ground maneuver operations. I don't see that. It doesn't mean that they aren't going to be opportunistic, and if the situation presents itself that they can't take advantage of it. What would that situation look like? For example, write this down, Russian listening guests. They want to cross the Dnipro with 300 speedboats and 10,000 guys. I encourage them to do that. Ukraine will always be in a position to swat that back. But the Russians, they don't even have a strategy. They've got no professor at the Army, Navy, Air, War colleges who dares to say this. We are fighting Russians to Ukraine's strengths, right? Ukraine doesn't have the equipment to launch ground-scale large maneuver warfare against us, but we are constantly told to conduct these pinprick attacks, diffusing our power all along the zero line, not concentrating it as ground warfare requires, getting to the jump-off point and hammering Ukraine. They can never do that. And because you have military geniuses in the Kremlin saying attack, 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 attack every day, I don't care, every single day, now you're playing to Ukraine's strengths, right? Ukraine doesn't have to maneuver forces. They don't have to advance their lines of logistics and supply. All they got to do is wait for the 10 a.m. Russian attack. And that's truly what it is. Sun's up for 2.5 hours. Here come the Russians. No artillery barrages, no indirect fire weapons, no heavy machine guns, no automatic cannons, just 300 North Koreans coming at you screaming bulgogi for everybody. That's why they've already lost 38% of the North Korean attacking forces in Kursk. These are good things.
Yeah, they are. They are good things. So anybody who has read only the headlines or the captions of photographs and you feel that things are going very badly for Ukraine, they're actually going pretty well for Ukraine. It doesn't mean that there are not hot spots that are going to continue to grow hotter. We're going to go to Pokrovsk in just one moment. And it doesn't mean that Ukraine doesn't have some problems that it needs to solve in its own military. But for a year on defense, without receiving adequate and timely military supply from the United States, I think Ukraine has performed heroically.
And here's something that, people have heard me say, you and I talking in the years we've been doing these shows. Ukraine is doing better right now under the existing conditions in the field than the United States Army would be doing. And I'm just going to say it. If you put the 82nd Airborne Division in Pokrovsk right now, without total air superiority, without air defense parity, without artillery dominance, okay, without adequately defended supply lines, you'd be getting worse results, right? As I say this because I want people to totally understand what it's like to be in the United States military. No one has ever shot at me from an airplane in my life. I don't know what a falling bomb sounds like coming at me. No American soldier knows that sound. We don't, because we own the sky, right? So, but that is not the case if you are a Ukrainian soldier.
No.
On a good day, Ukraine will put out 15 aviation strike missions. On a good day, Russia will put out 100 combat sorties. And that hasn't changed.
Well, if we move to the map in Pokrovsk, Russian air power continues to play a pretty significant role in this battle as it unfolds. A number of Russian airstrikes on 19 January, not quite as many as 10 days ago on the 9th of January. But I will point out, if just for the fun of it, you were to look at Chuck's 9 January Pokrovsk map and compare it to the 19 January Pokrovsk map, the very first thing you would notice, it's taken Russia 10 days to get into the little town of Kuteri, which is on the western edge of this map. 10 days to go a kilometer.
Yeah. And so the burn rate at different places in the battlefield along the zero line is, it varies. But Pokrovsk is and Kharkov below it are hotspots. So if we take the average, the sort of median 1,500 Russian casualties per day, and we try to you got to use some Kentucky windage here, but where are the heaviest bits of casualties? I would say when you have a 1,500 dead day, I would say that probably at least 300 or 400 of those dead are in the Pokrovsk area. So 400 times, what was it? 40 or what was it? How many
10 days.
10 days.
10 days. That's 4,000 casualties.
4,000 casualties. And hey, it looks great. You've taken Kuteri, and again, folks, there is a road that goes towards it, but it doesn't go anywhere. That doesn't advance you towards Pokrovsk. And again, when you're looking at maps, and maps of this scale are kind of a luxury, because you can see that, you're really getting the detail here. 1 kilometer is very visible on here. You can see the levels of the streets and everything else. But I always want everyone to remember, anything that's an open space in this map is a killing field, right? If you try to walk between any of these green lines, you're not going to make it. Whether it's a Ukrainian soldier, a North Korean soldier, or a Ukrainian soldier, you're dead. So that explains why it's taking Russia so long to move this. But again, the failure is not only at the tactical level for the Russians, but truly at the strategic level, right? All these little points of contact should have been, you take a battalion and they lose about a battalion a day. And they break it up into squads and platoons and spread it out all over the place. And even though their doctrine says the tactical element is the brigade task group, three battalions in this Soviet creation that NATO feared for years because it worked and it bashed the Nazis out of existence. But they don't read their own books. They just don't.
I'm mystified by that. I really am. But I would encourage viewers to compare Chuck's Pokrovsk maps over the last 10 days, and you will see just south of Pokrovsk, in the neighborhood of Perche-Travina, the Russians really have not moved that zero line successfully, although they've tried.
Yeah, this is, and again, Pokrovsk is on paper, right? This is a tactically desirable location, right? We have a transportation nexus, so that made it a desirable place for the Russians to capture. There's all these road junctions going out of there, but they get these cities. Well, it takes them years to get into proximity of the city. Then it takes them, if we're going by Bakhmut or Severodonetsk, but let's talk about Bakhmut, it took them a year and a half to fight their way through the city. And they still were blocked by the terrain at Chasiv Yar, which blocked them and negated that effort before they spent 70,000 casualties. A goddamn ensign with a topographic map could say that it isn't going to work, right? And Pokrovsk, hey, it's a transportation nexus. No one can deny, comrade. Look at all these roads here. It's at the end of the line, right? You can take Pokrovsk and you haven't gotten a springboard to anywhere. It's to win this war, the Russians need to be able to do something they can't do anymore. They don't have the leadership. They don't have the material. They don't have the fuel. They don't have the men. And that's large-scale ground combined arms maneuver warfare. They can't do it. Ergo, folks, they've already lost the war, right? They've lost it. They are not going to win it next summer or the next. And the last thing I'll say here, just for a second, is that earlier in the war, Putin ominously said that he was willing to lose 2 million people taking Ukraine. Well, Alan, you and I are going to have a little, we're going to have a drink on Victory Day because he's going to get damn close to losing 1 million. And that is in the spring.
Right. On May 9th, we'll see how close we are to 1 million Russian casualties. Now, Putin has said he's going to grow his army to 1.5 million. He would need an army of that size in Ukraine, at least, and even 1.5 million. And you know, that's a big army. 1.5 million Russians under arms in Ukraine probably isn't big enough to seize the entire country.
Well, you know, you look at what they're doing here. It cost them 420,000 casualties to capture Los Angeles County, right? And the nation of Ukraine is about the size of Texas. So they captured they captured two medium-sized, one medium-sized Texas county, losing as many people as the United States lost in World War II. And Putin, I'm glad you want a 1 million man army. It's great. You're going to have to feed it, train it, equip it.
Yeah.
Those are not jobs that are going to be working in the public sector, putting food on the table for families. And I've got another thing for you. That is not enough people for you to occupy a subdued Ukraine. I weep for you if you think it's going to be over. I weep for you.
Well, we were talking earlier just about some of the tasks that Ukraine's 880,000 strong army has in this war. Russia over 600,000 troops, but those 600,000 troops need to fight on the zero line. They also need to occupy that part of Ukraine where today Russia is repressing Ukrainians, brainwashing Ukrainians, torturing Ukrainians, taking away Ukrainian passports and forcibly issuing Russian passports. Now, I don't know how many Russian troops have this task of occupying Ukraine, but 100, 200,000 wouldn't be too far afield, it seems to me.
Not at all. And they have two things they've got to do. They've got to keep the locals down, and they've got to keep their own troops in line. And around Melitopol, it's Indian country for the Russians. It is filled with what the Russians like to call banditry, which means that almost every night sentries get shivved outside of that town, right? The Russians might ask themselves, why is it that whenever we have a conference with more than two generals, a HIMARS shell hits it? Why is it that when we have briefings of large tactical units in gymnasiums, why do HIMARS shells go right through the roof? Why is it that our security apparatus, the very men, and I'm afraid some women who order the rape and torture and murder of Ukrainian civilians, why is it that shaped charges keep going off in the driver's seats of their vehicles? It is because they are loathed, they are hated, and Ukraine is operating a pretty damn good partisan network in all of the occupied territories.
Yep. And taking care of the Russian spies, some actually Russian and some homegrown Ukrainians, taking care of those traitors who are operating in Ukraine as well. We talk about Ukraine's battlefield being saturated with drones. Well, Ukraine is also saturated with partisans and spies and espionage agents of Russia, and this is something that Ukraine actually does a damn good job investigating, exposing, and stopping.
Yeah, and there is everything within the Ukrainian military. There was an entire gamut of opinions, right? You could be a senior officer. I'm getting a little long in the tooth to be a senior officer, but you could be, and you would have come up as a member of the Soviet army, right? This was one of the socialist republics of the USSR. All of your training, your allegiance, your principal language, all of it Russian. And not every Ukrainian citizen is a Ukrainian patriot. It's simply the way that it is. Mm-hmm. And the Russians, as the Soviets were before them, they excel in espionage. And I don't encourage anyone to do this, but if you go back and you read Marx and Engels, it is like a boy's own story. The entire political and economic system is at its root a giant conspiracy with code names and it's baked into this fantasy that is communism.
Yeah.
Look, and I know, folks, I had to read it because they were the bad guys when I first got into this business.
I don't think they've been rehabilitated, Chuck.
No, I don't think so. No.
We are going to continue to watch what's happening in Pokrovsk. This is the centerpiece of the battlefield right now. In any given day, about half of the reported combat engagements by the Ministry of Defense occur right here in Pokrovsk. And that's a pretty intense slice of reported combat engagements. Usually 175, sometimes approaching or exceeding 200. So think of 100 of those combat engagements being reported here in Pokrovsk on any given day.
Yeah, and folks, if you aren't doing it, a great reference that Alan and I use, and I wish they were sending us money. In fact, you can send them money because they really need it. Is Live UMAP, and they follow conflict areas around the world, but they are principally, their bread and butter is the Ukrainian war. Their information is really good, really current. I'll give away one of my own secret sources here. There is a Twitter handle called Vigesti111. I am proud to be the only person he follows, which is a true honor. He has the best and most current and impeccably accurate information of any source in the war. And I would appreciate you giving him a follow. I know he doesn't listen to us because, frankly, he's got other things to do. But you can have the same sources that Alan and I have blundered into. I mean, Alan, it's almost 3 years we've been doing this, right?
Yes. Yeah. Almost.
Yeah. Almost. That's lasted longer than most of my marriages.
Well, my marriage lasted a little bit longer than that, but it might have been better if it hadn't. Anyway, we're not going to make this into some kind of Dr. Phil show. Well, in addition to taking a look at the zero line tactics, I do want to return to what I call Ukraine's strategic war, and this is the ongoing strikes of Russian refineries, command posts, fuel depots, airfields, etc. Now, Anton Gerashenko compiled a list, and I just want to quickly run through this because there are a couple of important things about it. On January 4, drones flew more than 900 kilometers. It hit Ust-Luga, which is the largest seaport up by St. Petersburg. On January 8th, Ukrainian drones flew about 1,000 kilometers, struck an oil depot at Engels. We remember that because that fire burned for more than 5 days. On January 10, fires broke out in the Rostov region of Russia, again, a Ukrainian drone strike. January 11, in Crimea, a number of Crimean cities came under attack. Now, this is 50 kilometers from the border, and across the Black Sea in Novorossiysk, 500 kilometers from Ukraine. Ukraine struck that seaport. January 14, Ukraine again struck Engels airfield and an oil depot, a plant in Kazan, the Saratov oil refinery, and the Bryansk chemical plant. That's the January 14, one of the largest Ukrainian drone strikes of the war. January 15, the very next day, an oil depot in Voronezh, 200 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. January 16, a gunpowder plant in Tambov. January 17, again striking the oil depot at Engels. January 18, oil depots in Tula and Kaluga, deep inside Russia. January 20th, an aircraft maintenance plant in Kazan, 1,000 kilometers from the border. And then today, January 21, striking a military facility, manufacturing facility in Smolensk. That's 300 kilometers from the border. So my point in running down that list is, first of all, to take note of the distances Ukrainian drones are now flying. And secondly, the continuity of these attacks. We've seen, I think, the satellite photos from angles. Big fire in the middle of the night warms your heart, but you really have to look at the satellite photos to see the damage that Ukraine accomplished. It's a big place, Engels. They have, dozens and dozens of fuel tanks. So there are still plenty of fuel tanks left for Ukraine to strike, but they have taken out about 5, and that means 900 fewer sorties being flown out of Engels Air Force Base.
Right, and Engels in particular, damaging the tank farms is a highly desirable and gratifying experience. But among these hits, I am certain they're also going after the plumbing, right? These tank farms exist next to this airfields to fuel the bombers, as of course Alan was mentioning, and this has depressed their ability. We're talking about 1,000 sorties. I mean, that's significant. There are still targets to be hit, but you could have appropriate damage. So even the fuel tanks that haven't been ignited are no longer of any utility in transferring EP25 to the jet engines. Now it's got to be done by fuel truck. So, there's a lot of dominoes that fall. The other place that was hit in Smolensk, it is a place that manufactured the cruise missiles, the KH-55s and the KH-59s that are used, and I just have to target this, used so Russians can hit targets like the McDonald's in Kyiv. There is this level of frustration and anger and fury that in the fact that Russia will lash out at civilian apartment buildings because, frankly, they can't find the Ukrainian military targets. They are dispersed. And I think it's also good for our Russian listening guest. Ukraine sees everything, right? Ukraine gets the grade A NATO satellite imagery of everything. That's why they're never going to run out of targets, because Russia can't hide their targets. And I'm talking about the kind of imagery that, here's my phone, right? If this were a pack of cigarettes from outer space, you could tell if this was regular menthol. Just let that sink in. And you know what? I'm not even talking about capabilities that you cannot imagine. Just the menthol cigarettes is pretty good. But those are, so things are truly looking bad for Russia. Mm-hmm. The other thing is Ukrainian drones are flying thousands of kilometers through Russian airspace.
Mm-hmm. And Russian air defense.
Russian zonal air defense, S-300s, S-400s, and all of the point defense systems, Pantsir, Zu-23s, autocannons, everything else that rings these targets, this stuff goes right through. And talking out of school, this isn't the first time that Alan and I've done this. We talk about something on indications and warnings, and this week my assignment from the Kyiv Post is a survey of the latest string of drone attacks against Russian targets. So that usually doesn't come out till the weekend, but Alan, once again, we have to get you an editor's chair at the Kyiv Post.
That would be fun.
That would be fun.
I'll tell you, it would be a lot of fun to be there. But I also uh, more and more continue to see this war on two levels: the tactical level on the zero line, again, which is where Russia has the advantage of mass and can concentrate forces at various points on the zero line. And this strategic war that Ukraine is fighting with its drones, finding these Russian targets inside Russia, or for that matter, taking out the Black Sea Fleet. And I think that Ukraine is decisively winning that strategic war with drones through the air. And they're not losing the tactical war.
No, they're not. And you look at the quid pro quo, right? So Russia will launch an attack, and their attacks almost inevitably are concentrated against civilian targets. Now, I'm not, it is understandable in war if your Russian adversary attacks your power plants. Okay, that's understandable. But Russia's not reciprocating, right? Ukraine does not hit random apartment buildings. They've hit apartment buildings on the 26th floor on the right side of the window. I'll leave it to your imagination why they would have a drone fly 600 kilometers to hit the 20th floor of a building. I leave that to your imagination. But what Ukraine is doing, they're demonstrating to the Russians that nothing you have is beyond our reach.
Yeah.
Nothing you have is hidden from us. When we talk about them hitting the Ust-Luga port facilities, that's the port complex for St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
That's their principal European shipping hub. And they concentrate on the important stuff, right? They're not hitting apartment buildings in St. Petersburg. No, they're hitting the nuts and bolts of Russia's ability to export oil and energy products. And that, too, my Russian friends, is a legitimate target of war.
Absolutely. And by what Ukraine is doing, degrading Russia's refining capacity, you put it together with the new sanctions that I think more than 60 Russian tankers around the world were forced to drop anchor and therefore not unload their millions of barrels of oil. This is going to make that clock Putin is racing against go a lot faster. It's going to create the chance that the Russian economy really collapses much more quickly.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, this is slightly off topic, but we talk about the inflection of the information, right? This week, for whatever reason, unsourced major U.S. markets, without naming names, intelligence sources say that the string of cable cuttings and pipeline accidents in the Baltics, they're simple accidents. Okay, who types this stuff up, right? I just want to say, as a third-generation naval officer, so a ship is pierside, conducting its business, unloading its oil, doing whatever. It takes it. The tugs maneuver it away. The harbor pilot comes aboard. He goes out. The pilot, you exchange it. The ship is underway, and suddenly it drops an anchor and drags it for 70 kilometers, and no one on the ship hears the chain rattling around in the forecastle. No one notices that the helm is not responding. It's total nonsense. So it's not the nonsense I object to. It is people don't listen to stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's utterly insane.
Yeah.
I ran a background check. I said, well, how many, asked the, how many pipeline accidents and cable foulings have occurred in the Baltic? And the computer comes back and says, well, they've all started occurring since 2022. Right. So they went, what? Let's just take it back to 1950. So we've gone 70 years without people fouling any pipelines and tankers. Well, yeah, because there's a purple line on a nautical chart. Every mariner knows that. That means it's a pipeline. Don't anchor. Don't, it's maddening, Alan.
It is maddening. And this is the misinformation war. It's the Russian propaganda war. There's a simple rule of thumb. Believe nothing Russia says. And
absolutely nothing.
This is preparation for the negotiation war that I guess will occur sometime in 2025 if President-elect Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio keep their intention of making the end of this war one of their priorities. What they will never end is the grotesque and gruesome atrocities that Russia has committed in Ukraine on the battlefield and in occupied Ukraine. The memories of those atrocities will last for more than a generation in Ukraine. And this must also be part of the negotiating picture. Russia needs to be brought to justice, and it cannot be rewarded in any way for this genocidal invasion of its neighbor. I hope that the negotiating teams from the United States and Ukraine, maybe some European nations as well. I don't know who's going to be around that negotiating table, but I hope they all come fully armed with the facts of what Russia has done and with the facts about this genocidal invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, and I don't see this war ending in 2025. No one's going to like this. I think more 2028 makes more sense to me. Look, that's a horrible thing to hear, but it's an even more horrible thing for General Gerasimov to hear. There is no solution, military solution for Russia in this war. There isn't. They can hope for some political concessions and solutions, but they're asking for things that are never going to happen.
Right.
They're just not. And as long as Crimea is occupied by Russia, there is no safety or security for Ukraine. There just isn't.
Or for Europe, for that matter.
And exactly, Alan, Europe. Ukrainian security is European security.
Yes, it is. And it's American security, frankly. And all Ukraine wants back is its sovereign territory and its future. Really, those are the only two things that Ukraine wants back. And, of course, its people, all of the kids that Russia has kidnapped and taken back into Belarus and into Russia. There are non-negotiables for Ukraine, let's say. There are no non-negotiables I can think of that Russia has.
Right. There's another thing that's going on here. As a military leader, as a statesman, as the leader of a one-time superpower, he decided to start moving chess pieces around Europe. He attacked the wrong victim, right?
Yeah.
He thought Ukraine was going to roll over. It didn't. This was an incredible, irredeemable blunder And I just want to tell people imagine if Putin got a wicked dose of Chuckinium 165 and he said, first I'm going to pluck the Baltic nations one by one, not Ukraine. I'm going to hit Estonia, then I'm going to hit Latvia, then I'm going to hit Lithuania. He would have gotten away with it. He really would have. Well, people are going to say, well, they're NATO nations. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows what NATO might have done if it was a fait accompli. But he has made the last blunder that he's ever going to make. Honestly, Alan, this is it. His downfall other things will contribute to it, no doubt about it. But this will be one of the major reasons why he too is going to get pulled out from under a bed one day.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Yeah. Remember, the Russian state is a mafia state. Putin is the face of that mafia, but behind him are other former members of the KGB and current members of the FSB. They really are Putin's bosses. He works for them. And as soon as he gets a few more demerits, I don't think they're going to want him any longer as the head of the Russian mafia state.
Absolutely. And, this is something we all can pray for, but I want to also remind everyone, dictatorships like this, they seem monolithic, totally homogenous, there for the ages until they evaporate into sand. Gaddafi, Ceausescu, Saddam getting pulled out of a spider hole. Insurgencies wane and wax and wars wane and wax, but these totalitarian states, they evaporate. We saw the Soviet Union evaporate. We saw East Germany with the most vaunted police state that the world has ever known.
Yeah.
Evaporate in the course of a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So it'll happen.
And when it happens, Chuck and I will be here, but Chuck and I will be here every week. You can depend on that with these just incredible maps that Chuck creates every single day, posts on Twitter. These are the maps that really help you understand what Ukraine faces in self-defense, what Ukraine achieves in self-defense every single day. And Chuck and I will be here on the day of Ukraine's victory when we'll say, Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava, glory to the heroes, folks. Alan, thanks for another great show. We'll have to do this again.
This week, Chuck. Thank you.
This week.
Good night.
Good night.